Hello and welcome to Season 1 of Vajrapod Conversations, where you can listen to a father and son's conversations about life and weathering the storms that face us in said lifetime. I'm one of your hosts, Namka, or just Nam, and my co-host happens to be a neuropsychiatrist, Dr. Chuang Norsang, who I will be affectionately calling Pala because that's how a Tibetan kid addresses their dad. In our first season of this podcast, we will be focusing on topics and issues related to navigating the workplace, which we hope will be helpful for not just our younger, early career listeners, but also for more experienced folks as well. A little something for everybody kind of thing. As a reminder, our podcast is not intended to be direct ethical or medical advice, and if needed, please seek professional help appropriately. So I've always found it fascinating when I hear about some people who are completely carefree and they don't seem to have a single worry in the world. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I, have this tendency to wish that I was like one of these types of individuals. And this is something I'm still trying to learn myself and realize that a lot of the times these are just external appearances. And nowadays, especially with social media, most people only display to the world their good sides, their almost quote unquote perfect sides.
That's true.
But I think none of us can escape sort of the worries and anxieties that come along with this human life. I mean, anxiety has existed since human beings have been on this planet, and we wouldn't be here without it. So this sort of dichotomy is kind of interesting to note. But I think nowadays in modern times, the word anxiety has sort of gained some negative connotations around it.
True.
So, of course, this particular topic is a really, really huge one, anxiety, I mean, and today's conversation about this topic is in no way going to be comprehensive, I think. So this will also be a topic of discussion in future episodes as well, but we'll try and do our very best to get most of the essentials down today.
Yes.
So anyways, that aside, so Pala, what exactly is anxiety and what is its origin story?
Well, you and me, all of us have felt anxiety or still feeling anxiety at some point in time. Anxiety is just the body's very natural response to any kind of stress. Stress that is either real or just perceived by your mind. So when you feel threatened or afraid, mm-hmm. Anxiety is the first emotional response that triggers the fight or flight response. Our nervous system is wired in such a way that emotions like fear or anxiety can trigger the brain. Namely a part of the brain called the amygdala, mm-hmm. Our emotional brain, the primitive brain. So when that is triggered, it generates a near instantaneous sequence of hormonal changes and physiological responses in order to help the person to fight the threat off or flee to safety. Mm-hmm. So the whole response actually evolved as a survival mechanism to help us humans and other mammals react quickly to life-threatening situations. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how carefully orchestrated, complex, and yet near instantaneous this whole response is. Unfortunately, the mind can also overreact to stressors that are not really life-threatening, such as work pressures, family difficulties, and so on. And as the survival process has become easier over time, we're sort of shifted our stress response over to our daily lives, the family, interpersonal relationships, our workplace. So we have anxiety over objects of situations or being judged by others, being away from familiar situations or following traumatic events. So for me, it's as if we've shifted the protective response from protecting the body more to protecting the mind. So anxiety is a perfectly normal body's response to any perceived threat. All of us have anxiety to some degree, and there's no shame in it, as it's not a negative response. The only issue is in our different degrees of understanding our own perceptions of threat.
I see. And I guess in modern times, another big factor is, of course, our daily work life as well, right? And sometimes it seems that work and anxiety kind of tie together in sort of like a weird dance of two. And you could almost attribute a lot of this, I guess, work-induced anxiety to the way, I guess, our social and family lives sort of changed with the onset of the Industrial Revolution.
That's right.
Because now, with once the Industrial Revolution began, there was a new way of working, a much faster pace of labor, with increased productivity requirements in a short amount of time. Although we're now moving towards what we would like to think is a post-industrial era, the artifacts from the previous industrial era still persist in our day-to-day work lives, and there's a lot of situations where we're still sort of chasing that work-life balance, and a lot of times modern workers find it difficult to preserve the same relational bonds and things like that we associate with family life that used to be part of everyone's day-to-day back in pre-industrial times, when the family was a very close-knit unit.
That's right.
So Pala, what are your thoughts on this intertwined nature, I guess, of anxiety and work?
Well, that's true what you said about the changing of anxiety, or rather the increase in anxiety as our work evolved, and that's putting us in a newer, faster pace for labor. But that aside, like we talked earlier, the workplace has its own sets of anxieties, right from starting a new job and getting to know new people, dealing with them, dealing with the negativities, trying to meet expectations, and so on. In fact, they say that 50% of the main causes of work-related stress are related to meeting deadlines, handling interpersonal relationships, staff management, and dealing with issues or problems as they arise. And then on top of that, we may also be bringing in our own anxieties with us to work. We may be generally anxious by nature, or have certain anxieties to certain situations or fears, like, for example, of being judged negatively. And among our own anxieties, I feel social anxiety as being commonly prevalent in most work-life situations. And this social anxiety is becoming more and more common nowadays. And we all know the feeling of being nervous or being uncomfortable in a social situation. Maybe you've climbed up when meeting someone new, or gotten sweaty palms before making a presentation, or like walking into a room
all the time.
yeah, walking into a room full of people. Just that isn't comfortable for anybody. But if you have social anxiety, then the stress of these situations feels too much to handle. So some of the anxiety providing situations could be something like starting conversations, talking to strangers, eating in front of other people, speaking in public, and so on. So socially anxious people have different reasons for the feeling of dread. But generally it's a fear of being judged, being embarrassed or humiliated, of a fear of offending someone accidentally, or just the fear of being the center of attention. And this feeling of dread makes you physically unwell, start becoming lightheaded, have a rapid heartbeat, rapid breathing, tense body, and so on. And then what causes social anxiety? I mean, the causes of social anxiety are multifactorial. It could be genetics, it could be developmental. Like in genetics, you could have a family history of social anxiety. That part of the brain that we talked about, the amygdala, maybe you have an overactive amygdala or oversensitive one. Or it could be developmental, growing up. Social anxiety usually starts in the early teens and is linked to a history of shyness, or teasing, or bullying. Children of controlling or overbearing parents also seem to be prone to developing social anxiety. But nevertheless, exaggerated forms of all kinds of anxieties prevent us from living our lives fully. And we have to go back to looking at our perception of threat that we talked about earlier as being the main culprit triggering this cascade of responses every time.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. Because a lot of the time it does feel like the anxious moments or tense moments at work, that those sorts of situations that we face are kind of more like stimuli or triggers that they sort of trigger our own underlying anxious feelings that we already harbor. I guess it's what you put as social anxiety. And nowadays, this is especially true in the field that I'm in, the tech field, where we hear about things like imposter syndrome, which I think most of us have experienced at some point or the other, or we are experiencing right now. Which, if for the listeners who are not aware of what this is basically this feeling of inadequacy or incompetence when you're in a particular position at work, and you fear that others soon will also have or will arrive at that same conclusion as you did about yourself. So I think these anxieties again seem to be stemming from that very perception problem that you talked about earlier.
That's
that
true.
Our own perception of our self-worth and what we think others perceive of us. But like you said, all of us carry our own, little insecurities, our own worries inside us. It's just human nature. But then how do we, I guess, find out if and when this anxiety is starting to become unhealthy for us? So are there any physiological symptoms to look out for? So I guess, what are some telltale signs when you want to find out whether your anxiety is actually becoming a real issue, a real problem?
Yeah, I think we all live in this spectrum of anxiety at one end, burnout at the other, and stress right in the middle. And we mainly tend to oscillate between anxiety and stress, depending on how we handle the situation. While, like you said earlier, some may handle their anxieties relatively easy, some of us may find it a constant struggle. And if this constant struggle goes on for too long, we then start worrying excessively. This worry and ongoing fear when it becomes so irrational that you can't focus on reality or can't think clearly, then you know that it's unhealthy. When the worry starts affecting your daily life so much that it interferes in your lifestyle, your sleep, your relationships, work, then you kind of know that the anxiety is not working with you. When you're tense all the time, it takes a toll on your physical body also, and then you have difficulty concentrating, you become more irritable, you have a lot of aches and pains constantly, headaches constantly, you feel tired all the time. So all these are symptoms of an anxiety becoming unhealthy, and one has to look at all these symptoms and realize that things have to change.
Right. I definitely agree that it's important to realize this moment when you need to make a change, but then also realize, which my fiance keeps reminding me, is that you are not your thoughts. And so we kind of also have to learn to separate our self-worth and our self-image
That's so true.
from these feelings of anxiety, and sort of accept the reality of anxiety, come to terms with the fact that it's here to stay, and it's just another problem, like you would find in a car that needs periodic maintenance and fixing.
That's true.
So now that we've come to that, what can we do to manage these feelings of heightened anxiety or stress that sometimes just seem to lie dormant in our subconscious minds? Is there any way to channel them maybe towards a more positive direction?
Yeah, like we said, anxiety is a normal phenomenon, and we can work with it and live with it. Even stress, for that matter, is workable. When we are quote unquote stressed out over a certain work deadline, we know it's only a short-term phenomenon, and a sense of urgency and heightened energy sets in. And then we go about finishing the task as much as we can. It's almost like, work doubles to fill time. But if this...
Not to our, previous episode. But
Yeah. But if the stress continues to happen on a regular basis, and then work starts triggering your anxiety, you may reach a point when you don't know what to do. But way before you reach that point, you can and must do things to kind of reestablish the harmony between your body, mind, and emotions. You can start by taking care of your physical body, making sure you're eating healthy, doing some kind of physical exercise on a daily basis. And then start accepting anxiety as a part of you. I mean, it's easy to say, but with practice, you will improve. Just remember, if you fear anxiety, then it becomes even stronger. Keep reminding yourself it's okay, it's not going to last long, be positive. And then continue self-reflection. It'll help you get to the cause of your anxiety, what's causing the anxiety. And once you have a rough idea of what's causing it, it'll probably help you figure out the next steps to take. Share your feelings with a trusted colleague, friend, family member, or significant other. Talking actually helps process emotions and really helps you get ideas, suggestions, or even validation. Then start letting go of your anxious thoughts. And you can do this by journaling, writing down and letting go of these thoughts, and that really helps. Basically, it's trying to slow down the thought spiral that you are going down in. And then asking for help. When you need it, ask for help. There's no shame in asking. You can always offer your support the next time they need it. And lastly, taking a break. Learn to relax using relaxation techniques. like deep abdominal breathing, listening to calming music, and also engaging in activities like yoga. So yeah, so these are just some of the way you can deal with anxiety and reestablish the harmony between your body, mind, and emotions.
Right, for sure. Those are very, very helpful steps actionable steps that we can take. And also, there's a thought experiment that I found, useful at times as well, when I'm able to sort of rationalize about certain worries that I might be having. And this is, I don't really know who to attribute this to. I've kind of heard this from somewhere, but it's this, saying that if you can't control it, why worry? And if you
Mm-hmm.
can control it, why worry?
Mm-hmm.
Again. So, but then at the same time, something like this can be very helpful, because this is a rational thought. But as we discussed before, a lot of times when we have heightened anxiety, the rational part of our brain is not driving the vehicle at that point. It's our instinctual response. It's our primitive mind with its fight or flight response. So at these times, rationality sort of goes out of the window, and we are now in this state where we become overwhelmed with our thoughts.
That's correct.
And sometimes this can lead to serious conditions like panic attacks or anxiety attacks. So in cases like that, are there any immediate coping strategies that you can apply at that very moment when you are experiencing these very uncomfortable and very difficult situations?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about panic attacks, I mean it's a huge subject again, but we can briefly talk about what panic attacks are and what happens and
Sure.
what immediate steps one can try and take. So, what is a panic attack? A panic attack is a sudden episode of intense fear that triggers a severe physical reaction, even when there's no real danger or apparent cause.
Hmm.
And these attacks can be very, very frightening. When it happens, you might think you're having a heart attack. You have an overwhelming sense of losing control, or even think you're dying. It's that frightening. But many people experience panic attacks, and these symptoms can happen suddenly without warning and can happen anytime. And what happens when you're having a panic attack is that your heart starts racing, you start sweating, and you experience shortness of breath. You have a sense of impending doom or danger, and you start trembling and shaking, and you basically have a fear of loss of control. And there are other symptoms as well, but those are the primary ones. But the worst thing about panic attacks is the fear that you'll have another one. And that usually affects future situations so much that you tend to kind of avoid them altogether. And what can you do in the immediate moment that you're having panic attack? I think recognizing that you're having a panic attack is important. It will remind you that it's temporary, it will pass, and you're okay. It takes the fear away. So I think you have to recognize, once you've had a panic attack, that you have to recognize that you are having a panic attack again. And then you can use other techniques like using deep breathing is really important, because at the time of the attack, you're actually hyperventilating. So when you do deep breathing, it can reduce the symptoms by controlling your breathing and make the other symptoms less. You can also use muscle relaxation techniques, like consciously relaxing one muscle at a time. It's also important. Some people like to close their eyes, and it makes sense because once you close your eyes, it reduces external stimuli, and it makes it easier for you to focus on your breathing. And always repeat an internal mantras. You can say it's okay. Just repeat that on a loop in your head. And some people, talk about finding a focus object, which takes your mind away from the immediate, sensations that you have, and which means you pick something in the environment and just consciously think everything about it. You see a book, a green covered book over there, and then you consciously think about the size of the book, what's written, what the on the side. You can even look at the frayed edges, and when you concentrate on that, gradually, the panic attack goes away, and you'd be able to avoid most of the unpleasantness, of the panic attacks.
Yeah, those are definitely very, very scary situations. One can find themselves in. And I think a lot of times for maybe someone who hasn't experienced those sorts of situations, or even like someone who hasn't had any bouts of heightened anxiety or anything like that, it's very hard to understand, someone else who might be going through that situation. So how can we be more empathetic towards people who are showing these signs, and whether it's like a loved one or maybe a coworker, or whoever it is that matters to you? How can we show a little bit more kindness and compassion, and support them when they need it the most?
Support someone with anxiety? Well, I think it's very important for us to understand how different we all are, understand the differences in how anxiety can manifest. Anxiety is a human feature. It's not a flaw. So one has to acknowledge that. Show your empathy by asking, the person what kind of support they prefer. Some people would probably prefer emotional support. Some need concrete or practical support. All these are gestures that you can do to make the person understand that you are acknowledging the anxiety, but that doesn't change who our perception, the person's perception in our mind. So we're not being very judgmental about that. You can also try to help them in their thinking and their thought pattern by posing the questions like, what's the worst that can happen? What's the best that can happen?
It's almost like guiding them towards...
Exactly.
And then sort of letting them find the solution themselves.
True,
and
absolutely.
You're just supporting, facilitating that.
Yeah. So you can offer all these supports, but try not to take full control. Leave the control there, and just provide your support. And then again, giving them constant reminders, reassuring them that despite what they are going through, that your perception about them hasn't changed is important, because that's a very positive thing, that he or she can hold on to.
Right. So I guess now sort of changing gears a little bit, but not really that much. Sometimes we also get to this point of no return, right? Whether it's either through internal struggles where we've spread ourselves too thin, or maybe through external triggers like toxic workplaces, things like fear-based management that's prevalent in some working situations, or things like external things like that. Whether it's either those internal or external cases, we've sort of almost reached a stage of complete burnout. And this also, happens to high-functioning people as well, who, seem to always be working and producing quantitative and qualitative results as well, like CEOs or these high-functioning people who, on first appearance, look like they're not suffering from any sort of worries or anxieties at all, but then a lot of times these feelings are bottled in, and eventually that can start deteriorating their own personal and emotional health as well. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do you prevent yourself from reaching the state of complete burnout? And if we do find ourselves in that situation of work-related burnout, what do we do then?
Yeah, like you were talking about earlier about successful people, facing burnout. Well, a burnout can only happen if you are committed in the first place. People who are not committed rarely get burnouts, so there has to be some degree of commitment to your job that makes you reach that point. And like we talked about earlier, along that spectrum of mild anxiety to moderate anxiety to stress to burnout, burnout is in the other end of the spectrum. That's when you reach a state where you start feeling out of sorts at work. You're unmotivated, you're tired, you start feeling detached or disengaged, you have trouble sleeping, you're always irritable, you're snapping at people, you might even, stop going to work on many occasions. You always, even at work, you feel constantly behind, you're kind of demoralized. In a nutshell, I mean, you're just physically, emotionally, and mentally exhausted, and you're also disillusioned by your whole work experience. So while stress is more anxiety related, I think, and is more short term, I think when you reach that burnout stage, it's that the stress is there for a longer period. You start feeling helpless and hopeless, and even your mood starts deteriorating. And one of the primary things that we see in burnout is lack of control. When there's lack of autonomy, time, values, and there's no recognition, people tend to reach that stage. And then the productivity drops. It starts impacting one's career, one's team, one's organization, and then it spills over to your personal life and relationships and so on. So, I hope nobody reaches this stage, but I think a couple of things to keep in mind at this or right before the stage is to analyze your job first. If you can prioritize your work, and if you can do the essential well, and if you can delegate some of the work to others, that might help. I think talking to your boss or your superior is important. Try and see if there are any other options or solutions left that could help you. And in the end, if you do decide to leave, continue to work with a purpose, because you're going to take that positivity to your next endeavor.
Right. There's definitely nothing wrong with trying to look for greener pastures if it makes sense for you at that point. So I think, one last thing I just wanted to touch upon is almost sort of going back to what we discussed before when we were talking about dealing with all these heightened anxieties and stress and all the other overwhelming emotions that we can feel, is that we're not alone, and we can definitely seek help from those around us, especially those close to us. And I think, and this is something that I guess is more prevalent in more conservative cultures, where we still don't view mental illnesses in the same light as other physical ailments, right? So a lot of times there's a stigma attached to seeking therapy or professional medical help when we are dealing with tough mental and emotional situations. And I think it's so important that we need to remember that there's no shame in seeking this sort of help, and we shouldn't be shaming someone else for seeking help.
Yes.
And we all of us humans, we thrive on social support, and we need to remember that we're all in this together. And I think the most important thing we need to keep in mind is to treat everybody with kindness and empathy, starting with ourselves.
And the mantra for today: anxiety is a natural response. Be kind to yourself. And remember, you're not alone.
And with that, here's the two of us reminding you to
Stay safe.
stay hopeful, and above all,
Keep shining.
If you end up liking our conversations, please consider supporting us at buymeacoffee.com/Vajrapod. Any support amount will go a long way in helping us to produce quality content and also work towards creating exclusive content for our donors in the near future. So show your support by buying 1, 2, 3, or 100 digital beverages for our podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Vajrapod. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to us on social media at VAJRAPOD Vajrapod, so that more people can join in on these conversations. Also, check out our website at vajrapod.com for show notes and more. All these links will be included in the description. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.